There's something happening across America right now that you can feel even if you're nowhere near it. It's in the tone of the conversations people are having, the frustration in their voices, the stories you hear from friends who used to swear they would never leave their city. You can sense this shift, this quiet, steady movement, long before you dig into any statistics or headlines. For decades, America's great cities were symbols of ambition. They represented opportunity, culture, energy, possibility. People moved to New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, not because it was comfortable, but because it felt alive. These places had a pulse. They challenged you, they pushed you, and for a long time, the trade-offs felt worth it. But over the past few years, that balance has changed. The energy didn't just fade, it turned. Something in the atmosphere changed. People didn't talk about the dream of the city anymore. They talked about the stress of it, the risk of it, the sense that everything was getting harder, while leadership pretended nothing was happening. And that's where the story really begins. What we're seeing now isn't random. People aren't leaving because they suddenly decided they prefer suburban lawns over warmer weather. They're leaving because everyday life in these cities stopped making sense. Crime isn't just occasional anymore. It's unpredictable. You don't know when it's going to happen or where. And you don't feel like anyone in charge is serious about stopping it. At the same time, the cost of living has skyrocketed, and to the point that almost feels insulting. You're paying more, much more for less safety, less reliability, less accountability, and instead of fixing it, leaders rebranded the problems. Crime became complex, chaos became compassion, and failure became progress. And residents are expected to simply accept the decline. And that's the breaking point. Not the crime itself, the denial of it. Not the cost, the disregard. Not the chaos, the excuses. So then, people started making decisions they never thought they would make. They began looking at places they once dismissed, states where leadership is boring in the best possible way, where basic services work, where the police aren't political pawns, where raising a family doesn't feel like a personal safety plan. What's happening now is more than migration. It is an outcome, the outcome of leadership decisions on priorities, on whether ideology can outrun reality. And the message people are sending is pretty clear. We're done waiting for you to fix what you broke. So then what happens when that many people walk out the door, you might ask? If you really want to understand why people are leaving these cities, you have to look past the headlines and into the everyday moments. The things people deal with on a normal Tuesday, so to speak, not just the big stories that make it to cable news. Because the truth is, the breaking point usually comes from the small things. The repeated frustrations, the slow erosion of basic order that wears people down until they finally say, all right, enough, I need out. Walk through neighborhoods that used to thrive and half the stores are boarded up or behind sealed gates. You go into a pharmacy and everything is locked behind glass. Not because people suddenly changed, but because cities quietly decided enforcing laws was optional. And this is the part that pushes people over the edge. It's not just that bad things are happening. It's that the people in charge act like noticing them makes you the problem. You mentioned the rising theft and someone calls it overblown. You talk about safety on public transit and a politician accuses you of stigmatizing communities. You bring up homelessness and they tell you the conversation is complicated, which is their favorite word when they don't want to fix anything. That disconnect, that refusal to acknowledge what everyone can see is what really breaks the relationship between residents and their leaders. Because when leaders won't name reality, you realize they never will fix it. You see the same thing in schools. Parents want their kids to learn, to be challenged, to grow. But instead, they deal with classrooms where discipline has collapsed, teachers are overwhelmed, and curriculum battles turn into these political theaters. And when parents ask questions, they are told they are exaggerating, or worse, that they don't understand the new version and new vision for education. Meanwhile, their kids fall further behind. You also see it in public services. Trash pickup becomes inconsistent, public transit becomes unpredictable, city agencies take months to answer basic requests. These are the kind of things that don't make an explosive headline, but they change how people feel about living somewhere. And that feeling matters. So here's the question. What happens when daily life becomes exhausting and your city makes you feel like your expectations are unreasonable? That's when the thought of leaving stops feeling dramatic and starts feeling logical. And once people realize they can get better quality of life, better leadership, and better basic order somewhere else without paying a premium to constantly be on alert, the decision becomes clearer than ever. So where people are going and what that means for the future of America's cities. When people finally make the decision to leave a big blue city, they don't just spin a globe and pick a spot. They're looking for something very specific. Not perfection, not paradise, but places where life makes sense again. And when you listen to them talk about where they moved, the pattern is incredibly clear. They're going to states where the basics are handled, where safety isn't a debate, where leadership isn't trying to reinvent the wheel every 6 months, where raising a family, opening a business, or simply walking down the street doesn't feel like a political statement. Places like Florida, Texas, Tennessee, and the Carolinas keep coming up again and again. And it's not because these states are flawless, they are not. But they operate with a sense of grounded realism that feels refreshing to people who just spent years living under policies built on theory, rhetoric, and moral lectures instead of actual results. In these states, the police are allowed to do their job. Schools, while not perfect, still prioritize teaching over ideology. Business owners don't wake up wondering if a new regulation or tax is going to wipe them out. And everyday problems are treated like things that actually need solutions, not opportunities for political messaging. What surprises a lot of people when they move is how quickly the stress drops off. You talk to someone who left New York, Chicago, or Los Angeles, and you hear the same line. I didn't realize how tense I was until I got out. Because when you live in a place where chaos is normalized, you don't even notice how much energy you spend just managing your environment, watching your surroundings, thinking through every trip, planning your day around safety concerns. It is draining. You can't even wear your expensive bag or jewelry that you work so hard to buy. And when that disappears, your shoulders drop a little. You breathe differently. You get time and mental space back. It's not just safety either. It's the feeling that the people in charge aren't at war with their own taxpayers, that your expectations aren't unreasonable, that your voice actually counts for something, and that the city or state you live in isn't trying to reimagine society at your expense. People crave normalcy, structure, predictability, and that's what these states offer, not as a political ideology, but as a basic standard of living. And here's what's interesting. Once people settle into these places, most of them don't look back. Even if they miss the food, the culture, or the energy of the city they left, they don't miss the stress. They don't miss the excuses. They don't miss watching their leaders pretending everything is fine where in reality isn't. And that brings us to the bigger point. What this mass movement says about the direction of the country and what it means for the cities people are leaving behind. When you step back and look at this entire movement, millions of people leaving blue cities over the last few years, say since 2021, it becomes clear that isn't just about housing prices or weather or lifestyle. It's a reflection of something much deeper happening in the country. People are voting with their feet, and what they're saying is louder than any poll or political ad. They're saying they're tired of leadership that believes ideology matters more than outcomes. They're tired of being told that crime isn't crime, that chaos is compassion, that declining schools are evolving, or that dysfunctional city systems are simply under-resourced. They're tired of making excuses for places that stopped working long ago. Because at some point, people realize the city they grew up believing in is gone. Not because it had to fade, but because the people in charge let it. And instead of rebuilding, they doubled down on failure and then expected everyone else to pretend it was progress. That's the real reason people leave. They just stop buying the story. And the cities themselves, they're feeling the consequences already. When the people who build the economy, the workers, the families, the small business owners walk away, the whole structure starts shaking. Tax bases shrink, services get worse, talent leaves, wealthy leaves, investment dries up. It's a slow motion unraveling that accelerates every year. The leadership refuses to course correct. But here's the part that should get everyone's attention. The places people are moving to aren't just gaining residents. They're gaining influence over time. They're gaining the political, cultural, and economic weights that the coastal cities used to hold. Power follows people, and people are moving. This shift from blue urban centers to red or purple states is reshaping the country more than any election cycle would. It's changing where businesses open, where families settle, where future political battles will be fought, and where America's sense of stability will be anchored. The momentum is moving towards states that prioritize order, safety, and responsibility over performative politics. It's as simple as that. And maybe that's the biggest message behind all of this. People are rejecting chaos. They're rejecting decline. They're rejecting the idea that you should tolerate dysfunction because it's supposed to make you more compassionate. People are not buying that anymore. They want a normal life, one where their kids can walk to school safely, where their job isn't treated like a liability, and where their city doesn't feel like it's held together by hope and luck. This isn't just an exodus. It's a correction, a redistribution of common sense across the country. And the cities that refuse to learn from it are going to keep losing. Not just people, but their future. When you look at what's happening across these cities, it's easy to get lost in the numbers, how many people left, where they went, what the charts say. But the real story isn't in the statistics. It's in the feeling that so many Americans share right now. A feeling that the place they trusted, the place they worked hard to build, simply stopped protecting the things that mattered most. People aren't leaving because they want a bigger yard or a cheaper grocery bill. They're leaving because they're tired of living in places where basic expectations are treated like unreasonable demands. They're tired of being told to accept decline. They're tired of leaders who interpret frustration as ignorance instead of responsibility. And as people move, the country is quietly realigning. New centers of gravity are forming, new communities are taking shape, new priorities are emerging. And in that movement, there is a message. Americans still want safety, stability, accountability, and common sense. They still want a life that feels normal and a future that feels possible. It's not that people have lost faith in America. No. It's that they are choosing the parts of America that haven't given up on them. And that's the American backdrop. If this episode gave you something to think about, something that sharpened your perspective, or something that just made the world make a little more sense, make sure to subscribe, follow, and share the message. This show is about clarity, not noise. It's about looking at what's actually happening in this country, not what we're told to believe. And it's about bringing back the values that keep a society strong: responsibility, honesty, and the courage to say what everyone else is whispering. Stay sharp, stay aware, and never apologize for using your own judgment in a world that keeps trying to replace it. See you on the next one.